Welcome to Chess News 14. I want to take a look at a game that was played today between Vladimir Kramnik and Luc van Wely during the first round, or no, it was already the second round, of the Sparkassen chess meeting in Dortmund. So after the 11th move of black, rook ft8, they reached the following position. Now, at this moment, Kramnik started pressurizing the h7 square. He played queen h3, and of course he's now looking to crash through here on h7 if black is not careful. But for the moment, of course, this square is still protected by the knight on f6. But since it also means that now this knight has to stay here on f6, black preferred to release some of the pressure, and he played h7, h6 here. Now, normally I like to see these kinds of moves, because the position really resembles a Torre attack. The only difference being that then usually the bishop is not on b2 but out here somewhere on g5 or h4. But h7, h6 weakens the g6 square here. So normally white gets quite nice play on the white squares after such a move. But in this position nothing much is happening yet. And Kramnik plays very solidly. He plays here f2, f4. And he's reinforcing the e5 square. And he's also sometimes preparing a rook lift over the third rank. And the position is not so easy to play for black. And he played here bishop b4. And this move is possible, and it attacks the knight here, of course. But surely Van Wely must have foreseen that the knight would go to f3, which Kramnik now played. Knight d goes to f3, connecting both knights now here. And after this move, this bishop here on b4 is a little bit offside, and that will become a very significant factor in the remainder of the game. Now, Van Wely played knight e4, and I still wouldn't say that this is a mistake, but it gives white the opportunity for a few captures. And captures are forcing moves, so Kramnik can now start looking for some forcing lines in which he can look for some kind of an advantage. Another way to play in this position, and maybe a safer way, would have been not to play knight e4, but knight takes e5. Because then normally white would recapture with the f-pawn, and only now play knight e4, when this square here on e5 is blocked. So now the knight, of course, can no longer go there. Also, this bishop here on b2 is not really participating in any kingside attack. It is just looking at his own pawns here in the center. And this knight here on e4 is blocking out the bishop on d3 from any kind of attack. So even though the f-file has now opened up and white has extra pressure because of this rook here, it is not so easy for white to start any kind of attack. And if he were to play, for instance, queen g4 here, pressurizing the knight here, then black has a very nice resource. He could try, for instance, here bishop c3, exchanging this bishop that was offside here. Of course, it also exchanges white's bishop, but at least black would be able to get rid of his bishop here on b4. Okay, but Van Wely played knight e4 in the game. And now I don't think Kramnik thought long about this, because these two knights here, they are on the same circuit, you could say. So usually it makes sense to exchange one of them and bring the other into a new attacking position. And of course white can now do that with tempo. So knight takes d7 followed, rook takes d7 followed, and now of course knight e5 attacking the rook. And I think that Van Wely now had a very difficult decision to make. And I think that he makes now a mistake. In the game he played rook c7. and we will look at that later. I think the better move would have been to go just back with the rook d8. And then if Kramnik would try the same idea as he tried after rook c7 in the game, with bishop takes e4, then I think black would be fine. Now c5, the same idea as follows later in the game. B takes c5, a3, bishop a5, d takes c5, and now not queen takes c5 because of this fork, after which black can try to save himself by pinning the b pawn with queen b5. But alas, unfortunately, after b takes a5, queen takes b2, rook a b1, we can now see that this bishop here will fall. So after d takes c5, not queen takes c5, but instead in between f6. And now after knight c4, black has bishop c7, and hey, this is the square where black's rook went in the game. So I think that's why rook retreating to d8 would have been better. So let's go back to the game, where after knight e5, Van Wely played rook c7. And now Kramnik came up with a very interesting strategical idea. First he gives up the bishop pair, as we just saw in the line before. Bishop takes e4, d takes e4, and in doing so he weakens black's control over the c5 square. And now he plays c4, c5, and he achieves a number of things with that. First of all, the connection between bishop and queen is cut off. Second of all, this also means that the bishop here will be in danger. He's now threatened by, not a4, by a3 of course, and then if he goes to a5, the bishop would be lost by b3, b4. And third of all, this pawn here on c6 is now blockaded. And this means, of course, that the bishop on b7 remains weak. And the pawn on c6 is also a target for white's knight. And white also has the added possibility that maybe he wants to maneuver his knight around via c4 to d6 even. And also, if black would ever decide to take here on c5, then white could recapture with his d-pawn, opening up the long diagonal for the bishop, which would then be on a very strong diagonal towards black's king. So we can now really understand why c4, c5, preluded by bishop takes c4, is a strong idea. And I think that Van Wely again makes a mistake now. Probably best would have been to play f6, to chase this knight from its dominant position like this. And then after knight c4, black could try bishop a6 to start playing with this bad bishop here. After rook fc1 and bishop a5, already moving the bishop out of harm's way, which would threaten something like an exchange here and then b5. White could play knight d6, but then after bishop d3, at least black has some play with his bishop, also over the white squares. And this diagonal here is still not opened, and black remains some pressure here. Yeah, of course this is a very strong knight, but you cannot win the war only with one strong octopus on the 6th rank, of course. Okay, so I suppose that would have been a better option. But after c5, the move with the many arrows, black played b takes c5, and now really white's idea comes to life. First he chases the bishop. Now that bishop has to go to a5. If it goes to d2, it can be easily attacked, for instance, by rook f2 or something. So bishop a5. And now white opens up the long diagonal for his bishop. D takes c5. And now f6 is no longer possible, because now knight c4 would really be a very strong move, attacking the bishop on a5 here. So after d takes c5, Van Wely played queen takes c5, which is still tactically possible, because after the fork b4 he did not rely on queen c2 because of rook f2, after which the bishop on a5 will fall, but he relied on the pinning of the b pawn with queen b5, also as we saw earlier. But in this position, Kramnik now misses a very strong opportunity. He could have played here the very strong f5, and of course this move makes a lot of sense because it opens up the f-file for an attack against White's king, and it also threatens to win material here on e6. And it also opens up this diagonal here for an attack on the rook on c7 with queen g3, for instance. And it also threatens to play f5, f6, really breaking up all these black squares around this black king here. So the best defense in that case would be f6, attacking the knight and also blocking the f-pawn. But then after knight g4, still pressurizing these black squares here, and still also threatening sometimes to take the bishop here. Bishop b6, queen g3, White would be winning in this position. He just has too many threats, being, for instance, to take here, or to take here with the knight, or to take here with the knight. So yeah, in this position there is no more defense. But after queen b5, Kramnik did not play f5. He played here a more modest move, probably missing a possible defense from black. He played here queen g3, which also makes sense, of course, because now both queen and bishop, they are eyeing the g7 square, so you just need to move this knight out of the way with some kind of crushing effect, and you would be winning. But now I think Van Wely makes the last and final mistake. His bishop on a5 here is still in a spot of trouble, and he moves it out of harm's way now with bishop b6. But what he should have played, since the b pawn is still pinned, he should have played not bishop b6 but f5. And this f5 move has the advantage that it takes away the g4 square for White's knight, but also makes possible a lateral defense here over the 7th rank of the g7 square by the rook on c7. And that really would have justified moving the rook to c7 a few moves earlier. But when Van Wely missed this last move, he was really on the losing end of this game. So let's go back to the game. Bishop b6 was played. Now f5 still would have been a very strong move, but Kramnik chooses for knight d7, which also does the trick, I suppose. Now, of course, it threatens mate here on g7, so black has to do something against that. And yeah, it doesn't really matter, because after a move like f6, knight takes f6 would have been possible, so Van Wely plays g6 in this position. But you can imagine, of course, that this also horribly weakens all these black squares around black's king, and now it is not too difficult for Kramnik anymore to win the game. In the game he played knight f6. Another nice option would have been to play knight takes b6, which eliminates the defense of this rook here. So black would have to recapture with his queen, protecting his rook, because then after f4, f5, at least his rook here is protected by the queen. But we can see that after a move like king h7, to protect his pawn here, and queen e5, White is also winning. This long diagonal here is tremendously strong, and the opposing bishop, which is of wide squares, is simply doing nothing here on b7. So as a matter of fact, white is playing there with an extra piece, as is usually the case in middle games of these types with bishop of opposite colors. Okay, so after g6, that was not how Kramnik decided matters. He played here knight f6 check, just chasing around the king. It has to go to f8 really. And now, again, Kramnik was not really up to the task. Again, f5 would have been a very strong option for aforementioned reasons, of course. Threatening to take here, threatening to take here, opening the diagonal here, opening the f-file for the rook, maybe chasing the queen, so that then e5 would become accessible for white's queen, etc., etc. No, he played here after king f8, bishop e5. And of course this attacks the rook, and it is still leading to white's advantage, but stronger would have been much stronger to play f4, f5 here. So now rook c8 was played, and queen h4, which is still good enough. Now, black could have played something like bishop e3, but after king h1, he would remain in a troublesome position. He is still threatened by queen h6 and moves like rook fd1, which will cut off black's king from going to the center or even the queen side, and the pressure of white's pieces is simply too much. So Van Wely, after queen h4, did not play bishop e3 check. Maybe he wanted to keep this bishop move, for instance, in reserve, who knows. Anyway, he played h5 to prevent his h-pawn from being taken. But then there followed knight h7, really chasing the king now towards the center. And bishop d6 followed, threatening mate here on e7. Now there are two possible defenses. Maybe Van Wely thought earlier that now he should play something like bishop d8, but then after knight f6 check, bishop f6, queen f6, white is clearly winning, of course. So in the end, after bishop d6, he played rook c7, just going back, protecting here against the mate on e7. But now after rook fd1, Van Wely resigned. His king is completely cut off from safety. The threat is, for instance, to play the queen to f6 and start really giving lethal checks here on the 8th rank. Also, knight f6 is a check, so you could suppose that Van Wely could try queen f5 to prevent at least queen f6, but then knight f6 would follow, and after king d8, bishop e5 discover check would be possible, but after king c8 and knight e4, there would be a threat of a horrible fork to king and queen here, and if black were to prevent that with king b8, then rook d8 check, bishop c8, and rook c8 decides matters. Notice that black's rook cannot recapture because it's pinned, and if the black king were to recapture, then again the knight fork simply wins for white. So, a very interesting game between Kramnik and Van Wely. White's position was of course playing easier than black's position. I suppose that Van Wely started making a mistake when he put his rook on c7, where it would have been better to put it on d8, and I suppose that he followed it up with another mistake, b takes c5, where maybe, what was my suggestion? Yeah, to play f6 first would have been better, and I suppose his final mistake was to play here after queen g3, bishop b6, where he still could have saved the day, or could have fought a very tenacious defense with the very nice move f7, f5. Okay, so that ends our discussion of this second round game from the Dortmund chess tournament. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again in another round.